Hi, I'm Mary Maudsley Scruggs,
And I'm Josie Blosser.
and this is Are You in Session? Okay, so today we're talking about
The differences in your experience or the potential experience you might get if you go to therapy at an agency setting, which would be more community mental health based, and private practice setting, which is where Mary and I work, the type of setting we work in. So maybe the first question we should ask, or we should kind of process through, is why is it important to know the difference?
That is a good question. Why is it important to know the difference? And we're talking, and today we're focusing more on just like general knowledge, right? Like we're not talking to just therapists today, but
Right.
It's important to know the difference as far as I think just like expectations go, or getting what you need, because they both can offer different things, and of course one private practice can offer something different than another private practice. So,
Right.
But we can talk in more general terms today.
Right. We could be walking ourselves into like a trap, because obviously every therapy experience is probably going to be different based on the therapist, the client, the setting they work in, insurance, money. There's a lot of factors that influence how therapy is done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think kind of talking about it in a more general way might be easier.
Yeah.
And then if you have questions, of course, you can always, leave a comment, send us a message, and we can follow up and answer those at a later time.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of funny because we were talking earlier about like our different experiences as far as working at agencies and private practice. And just a little background on me, I've worked at two private practices. One was an internship, and then I've been here. And then as far as agency goes, it's like the closest I got was my our graduate program,
Right.
which isn't really agency in the traditional sense that we're kind of referring to.
Right. And so I had a little bit of a different experience. So during our graduate program, we were required to have what we called an off-site placement or an internship. And we had the option to go work in different settings. And so I was able to go work in an agency setting. And I think the biggest difference for me is a lot of times kind of how therapy is structured based off of requirements. And the requirements exist because of the funding sources that help provide reduced or free therapy. So the agency I worked at provided completely free therapy, so no one had to pay money for it. But that means, internally we were working on funding sources, writing grants, and then those people who are giving you money want to know that they're giving you money and that you're making progress with your client. So just kind of the way things worked out from the therapist side was a little bit different. I don't really know that the clients were entirely aware of that.
Yeah.
But I think even I've heard of in some agencies, this was not the case in the one that I worked at, but like some agencies will have like 30-minute sessions versus the full 50 to 55-minute sessions. And I don't really know the reasoning behind that, but I feel like that's less common to hear about in private practice settings. It's pretty standard that you do a 50-minute session at least.
Yeah. So maybe we should kind of just go down the route of discussing agencies and then kind of go to private practice. We're not just going back and forth.
Yeah.
So I think I'm curious for you, like if someone were just coming to you and was like, hey, I'm going to get therapy at an agency, what might I expect to start off, or what should I look for? I mean, what are some thoughts you would have with that?
So I think something that I would say with an agency that they would likely experience, even if they don't experience it directly, is there's a lot of like consultation and kind of group work, because there's multiple therapies housed in one place of work, and there's typically going to be some type of consultation or conversation. So you might have multiple sets of eyes on your case without you even realizing it, giving input to your therapist of, hey, have you thought about this? Hey, have you thought about this? I think that adds a lot of value, both to the clients and also to the clinician, because it's more insight, it's another perspective, and then you're just getting far more feedback. And the therapist is feeling very supported in that.
Yeah.
I would say you're going to have, if you're at an agency setting, you're just going to have a little bit more community outreach, community involvement in an agency. So I know where I worked, like we were doing tons of community events to make our services known. So we were pretty out and about in the community, which is just a little bit different because as a private practice therapist, I think of all the ways I try to not have my clients see me out in their public lives or in my public life. But in an agency setting, that wasn't really an option. Like if we're going to the town parade, having a booth or a table, then I just knew to expect that it was likely that I could see someone there that I work with in a professional setting.
Because you just have other ways of being outreach for them. Yeah.
I would also, if someone asked that question, hey, I'm considering doing therapy in this agency setting, what should I expect? I would say that they could also expect that there's going to be multiple options of different styles of therapy. So this could be individual therapy, it could be more group therapy, there could be more classes, just a different variety of ways to achieve your goals, to get that healing, to work on problems that you've identified in your life.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about is, of course, there's different agencies too. So it's like you could be going to one that is focused on domestic violence, and so it could be a shelter. You could be, there could be housing in that included, and then you also get therapy and some other things.
And like even life skill classes.
Yeah.
Whereas in private practice, you're probably only ever going to get a very traditional, like one-on-one or couples style type of therapy. So that, I guess we can talk about what we do here at Family Solutions when we jump over to the private practice.
Yeah, so it's like you could just be getting, and some organizations have like psychiatrists there, so you could be getting your medication there and things like that. So I feel like if we're not really doing pros cons, but I feel like that's a big pro of going to an agency for help, is because they're gonna be able to like walk you down the hallway rather than be like, go call this person, go call that person.
Right.
And insurance. I feel like you might have more access to, you might be able to find someone who covers your insurance a lot easier.
Right. It might be more common for an agency to take something like Sooner Care or Medicare, whereas private practice clinicians may not do that. And so that might be an easier way for you to find more affordable therapy rather than having to deal with the cost of private practice therapy. Again, I think for me the biggest difference between working at an agency and working in private practice comes down to the funding and who's paying for the services and how is that impacting the therapist.
Yeah. And so with agencies too, I guess one thing that could be hard is they could have a longer wait list because they are able to cover more insurance, or it could be free.
Right.
And so of course more people are going to want to have free services.
Right. Absolutely.
Available. So it could take longer to find a therapist.
And that also might mean, and this would be more of a conversation if someone was like, hey, I'm a therapist, should I go work in private practice or should I go work in an agency setting? But I think something to be noted is that probably means the agency therapist is seeing a lot more clients than a private practice therapist could be, because the volume of potential clients to be seen is going to be a lot higher because of the benefits of going to an agency. So that clinician might be having to do a lot more work, whereas private practice clinicians, for their own reason, will not typically see as many clients. And I mean, agencies are all very different. Some have a very safety net of we will not overwork our clients, and some agencies know that there's a very high demand and need, and so they will have their clients work in an excessive amount.
Yeah. So as far as agencies goes, I don't know, are there any questions that you would think that people would just be asking you when they were looking into services there?
I feel like a question I get a lot in private practice, and maybe not so much because maybe it's more understood, is who's going to have access to my case file? Who's going to see this? I get asked that a lot in the private practice setting because people typically come to private practice for the additional privacy, because things like agencies or places like agencies are going to have kind of back in the day when it was paper charts, I would say like a communal, file that you put your paper files in that, no one should be snooping through them and looking through them, but you could see them. But they're having audits. So those funding sources, a lot of like government funding sources will do bi-yearly audits to make sure that the services being rendered are meeting goals and that they can justify why they're giving money to this agency. And so you might be having some extra eyes on your files. That all still files within the HIPAA guidelines because they are also maintaining HIPAA. So there's not a breach of confidentiality. It's just kind of
like a comfort level.
So I think that's a question I've gotten in private practice, and very explicit, and that's why I'm not going to an agency is because they don't want an insurance company auditing a file or whatever. Which
of course would be a privilege, I think.
Right, to absolutely.
Say, if you can make the choice of the two. Something else I was thinking about is, as far as goals go, I wonder if you would say treatment could look different for you going to an agency versus a private practice, because I feel like in private practice we've found treatment can be very fluid. It can be, you can come for a few sessions, you can come back for a couple years later, whatever. Would you say it looks very different?
I would. Again, this is a one agency experience from one therapist, and so please go talk to other therapists of what their experience has been of working in an agency. But my experience was you identified a goal. So if I am the person going to therapy, it would be Josie wants to improve her self-worth, and then we're going to evidence how that can grow. So Josie will demonstrate that she is improving her value of self by writing down 5 positive affirmations, coming up with a mantra that she repeats to herself daily, going out and meeting new people. If, those are things that I think I want to do. If I valued myself, I would do them. But if there's something that you would notice that almost all of them are quantifiable, you can count them. So 5 positive affirmations. She's going to say something to herself daily. She's going to go meet one new person every 3 weeks. And so then as the clinician and the client are working on the goals, they can sit there and say, hey, these are measurable. Can we see that it's happening?
Okay. It looks like we have a question.
Great. Okay. Do private practice therapists work as a team like some agencies do?
That's a good question.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's a great segue.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I was we probably should start talking about private practice. So, of course, every agency can be different. Every private practice can be different. So I have, in seeing, both of the private practices I've worked at have been technically group practices. So there's been multiple therapists. And at ours especially, we really take a good team approach, especially with play therapy and then with sex addiction and recovery. So yes, there can also be some private practices where I feel like it could be one person. They can be their own business, and they don't have a team because it's just them.
Right. And I think, so we're really unique here at Family Solutions. I say unique. It feels unique to me that we are a group private practice, and so we really try to work on having that group feeling. Whereas if I just had my own private practice and I had my own office, or even if I rented a space here in this actual building, I may not have the privilege of collaborating with other therapists because I have to practice confidentiality. There's a lot more boundaries. However, you can consult. So I might call up Mary and say, hey, can I have an hour of your time to consult on a case? And I'm going to do that while maintaining confidentiality. But what that looks like is I'm probably going to have to pay Mary for her time. Because if she's not seeing a client because she's seeing me, that means she's losing money. And so that's how it could look differently if you're working in a more individualized setting.
Yes. And so it's not impossible to have a team approach, and it's not impossible for even a therapist who is by themselves in private practice to work with other clinicians of some sort. There's just a lot more boundaries that they have and loops they have to jump through. Getting consents for release of information. And I mean, any place sees that, right? Like, if I need to get in contact with a client's doctor for whatever reason, like, I'm anywhere you are, you're probably going to need some paperwork done for that.
Right.
But it is definitely possible that there's a team approach, and that is where I think we both enjoy working here, because it is a lot easier to just be like, we're already in-house and we can talk to each other, and we already tell our clients right off the bat we have a team approach.
Right. Yeah, that's in our policies and procedures, is that, you know, those of us who work for Family Solutions, we are all under this umbrella where we can consult with one another, and that doesn't mean, that means we don't have to go get an additional release of information, because we're just bringing on more professionals to have eyes on the case. So it'd be a lot like if you go to the doctor and there's some obscure, absurd illness that people are not able to diagnose so easily, they're probably going to bring in a team of physicians to look at what's going on to get the best diagnosis and then the best treatment plan. We do that as mental health clinicians. Yeah. So that's a great question.
So since we're on private practice now, what else would, if, again, a client came and was like, not a client, but a potential person wanting to seek therapy, and they were like, what would I expect if I were to go see a therapist at private practice? What would you tell them?
I would tell them the schedule can be weird because they're not working traditional 8 to 5s, which a lot of agencies offer what we would call evening sessions. But sometimes private practice therapists don't even work 5 days a week. I don't. And then the second thing I would tell them is you need to figure out how you want to pay for this therapy, because either insurance is going to pay for you. You have to find a therapist who takes your insurance, or you have to be ready to pay the rate of a private practice therapist.
Yeah. Now, in private practice, obviously the funding does not look the same as agencies. And so it is completely based on clients.
So if someone said, hey, Mary, why do you charge what you charge? What would you say?
I would say it has to account for everything that one just kind of goes into the business, like supplies, things like that. How else am I supposed to pay for those things?
Right.
It would be me, my education, you're paying for what you get. I feel like, a lot of times it's like, well, I have a master's degree. If you go to one physician over the other, treatment can look, I'm talking like even like doctors, like DOs and MDs, they're different, right? And I don't really know how their charging goes, but I'm just using that as a comparison. So what else? I would say,
the education, the additional ongoing training that we have.
Yes. And charting too.
Right.
You have to pay for the time for that, which is part of the reason we often do 15 minutes, just because we need those 10 minutes in between for doing the notes.
Ideally. Very rarely am I ever kicking my clients out at 15 minutes, as it is a personal growth area that I have to get better at.
Authentic self.
I give my clients every minute for their pennies. The charting. So, and things that people may not know, and it's important to know, is therapists have to do, and most professionals do, have to do some type of ongoing education. So we call, continuing education is what they're commonly known as in every professional industry. Well, there are so many we have to require.
And they're not always cheap.
Of course, there can be free ones, but then you have to really measure quality over quantity of money. But then we have specialized training. So like you've done work for betrayal trauma. I've done work for sex addiction. There's like EMDR. There's, EFT, which is emotion focused therapy. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yeah, it's the D I always forget for some reason.
I switched the D and the R. But those are things that therapists have to take time out of their work day. Typically, those trainings happen in the middle of the work week. So they take time out of their work week, they pay for those trainings, and then there's typically some type of supervision that is also taking place to make sure that the therapist is becoming really good at this skill they're trying to have. So while those trainings are happening, that means they're not seeing clients, they're not getting paid, and you're also, as a client who's going to see a therapist that has these specialized trainings, you're paying for that quality training.
Yeah, the rates don't, they're not set lightly. They come with a lot of thought. and reasons for that, because again, it's not the same funding as agencies have, where they're able to kind of fill in those gaps for the office supplies, for the trainings, things like that.
Yeah, and I would say that again, the one agency that I worked at for a very minimal amount of time, they were typically able to find grants or find ways to fund the clinicians' training, so that wasn't out of the clinician's pocket. That may not be as common in private practice.
Yeah.
Or the business has to pay for it. So, like if Mary and I had a private practice or our own private practice, like our practice could pay for it, but at the end of the day, it's our business money.
Right. Yeah. Right. Now, again, there could always be wait lists, but it may be shorter because not everyone's necessarily going to the same therapist, trying to go to the same therapist, because that therapist probably doesn't cover every insurance. And so the wait list could be shorter. There can also still be a wait list.
I would also say it might be worth discussing why maybe private practice therapists don't seem to be taking as many insurances.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because people are probably like, well, why?
Yeah, I think if we had Hannah, our front office manager, on here, who's our behind the scenes camera lady today,
or also production team leader,
she would probably be able to emphatically says probably the biggest frustration of people who call our offices is that we don't take every single insurance that exists, and then a complaint and question as to why we don't. I'm sure people have said things like, we just want to see wealthy people, or we're not trying to help anyone, which as a therapist really stinks, because that's what we're not in it for the money.
No,
I know,
we did not go into this for the money.
Yeah, if you pay private pay rates, you might be like, that is not true, but I wish your feelings and our reality lined up.
Yeah.
But I would say mental health in general has not been valued by insurance companies. It's not like going to a doctor. Therefore, insurance companies are slowly getting better at compensating therapists for the work they're doing, but that has been a slow, tedious process, and that's a lot of times why therapists won't take certain insurances, is because the compensation does not reflect the value of the therapist.
Right, and for all the reasons we just mentioned, like, those rates are there for a reason. And so if they can't pay their bills and have the lights turned on, like, of course that insurance is probably not going to be taken.
Right.
They also can oftentimes take really long to pay you back, and it can be a whole thing. But it has gotten better. But something unique for our field, since we are LMFTs and candidates, so marriage and family therapists, we see families and couples, and that is a whole other thing with insurance too, where a lot of times they only cover individual therapy.
Things that I think people who go to therapy may not realize is a lot of behind the scenes work, which I feel this way when I go to the doctor. Like, I go to the doctor, do the examination, get the medicine, whatever I need. I want them to make me feel better, and then I leave. I don't worry about where the money is coming from, other than what I'm paying, what they have to put into their system to make sure they're getting appropriate money. So things that I don't think clients realize what goes into the work outside of the work in the room. Right.
It's like we don't just sit on the couch and listen to people and call it a day. And there is a lot more work that goes into it. So we are about out of time. Is there anything else you feel like would be helpful for people to know, or?
I think the one thing I would want to say, as someone who has worked in both settings, is that in general, therapists are quality, and there's therapists who are not quality. Like, bad apples and good apples. I said it, I'll say it. I'd say that about every profession, though.
Yeah, so of course.
I'm not coming at any one job. So it's really great this is on the internet for me to just probably get complained about.
No, you're right. It's every profession.
But with that, I would say therapists in their setting thrive because they know what they can handle. So for me, it was a learning curve transitioning from an agency to a private practice setting, and I had to learn new personal skills so that I could thrive in a practice setting, because it's not as structured and rigid as what my agency setting felt like. But for me personally, but there are some therapists who really thrive in the agency setting. Yeah. They enjoy the type of work, they enjoy the paperwork, they enjoy the audits. It caused me a lot of anxiety. I felt very suffocated by that, but I also didn't know how to handle the freedom of private practice.
Yeah, that was a whole other learning curve.
Yes. Yeah. So that's where I would say, no matter where you go, your therapist, wherever they're at in whatever setting they're in, they're probably there because they know it works best for them.
Yeah. That's a good point of, different personalities work in different environments better than others.
Mm-hmm.
And like even you and me in the same environment, like we work differently
Oh,
because we know
absolutely.
what works best for us. Like
Absolutely.
days and times that I see clients and how many clients, you know, just that
Right.
alone, it's important to just be aware of that because we want to avoid burnout as much
Right.
as we can.
Right. I think the cool thing about us is we can easily refer other people to go see therapists in all settings. Like we've got some agencies that we really trust and we know that they're doing quality work, and we have a lot of private practice therapists that we know that they're putting out quality work and we trust, and we can refer them if we are unable to take, you know, new clients.
Yeah. So every organization is different, and you can get things from private practice that you can't get from agencies, and you get some things from agencies you can't get from private practice.
Absolutely.
And they're all working toward the same goal, which is helping people with their mental health and trying to create a happier, better society.
Right.
I would say that's what we're all working toward. But it's a bumpy road.
Right. It sure is.
So if you guys have any other thoughts or questions or concerns, I don't know, feel free to comment or message us.
Or if there's new topics you want for us to talk about, we would love input.
Yes. I think we have some fun ones coming up. And then, of course, tune in every Friday at 12:30. And we have our other lovely shows.
Yes. So we will see you, Mary and I will see you the first Friday of July. That's our next video. But in the meantime, be sure